All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Johnny Geathers. I am the National Coordinator for TIME, in which TIME stands for Theta Men Improving Through Mental Empowerment. So, with TIME is an initiative that falls under the community impact team of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. And with TIME, we focus on the three categories, which are mental health, financial wellness, and legal wellness. And with today, we wanted to talk more about suicide prevention. As we all know, September is Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. So, with this event, you're going to learn more about different statistics about suicide prevention, the warning signs of suicide prevention, and also ways on how to, handle individuals that are dealing with having suicidal ideation, thoughts, and things like that. So, without further ado, I'm out to present the first presenter for this evening. Her name is Jessie Pukowski, who is an area director of Western PA chapter of American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to presenting our information.
And before we start, Jessie, without further ado, I do want to give a big welcome to our 23rd International Grand Treasurer, Brother Anthony Harton. All right, Jessie, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. So, as stated, I am Jessie Pukowski, the Area Director for the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Thank you for having me this evening to discuss this very important topic. Even though suicide can be a sensitive topic to discuss, talking about it is critical to its prevention. So overall, I hope you are able to learn more about suicide prevention from the presentation and become more comfortable talking about this important issue. Suicide is a complex health issue. Despite its complexity, suicide can be prevented. Just like there are warning signs and risk factors for other health crises like cardiac arrest, we can learn the warning signs and risk factors that can help us to prevent people from dying by suicide. As with other health issues, prevention can start early, far in advance of the problem, or prevention can occur closer to the time of the crisis. Time can be a critical and life-saving measure. Typically, a life can be saved if you allow time for the person's suicide risk to subside or to get through that period of distress and to get mental health help. To prevent suicide, we need to identify persons who may be suicidal, as well as take an active role in connecting them to help before they take an action to end their lives. So the purpose of Talk Saves Lives is to provide community members with a general overview about suicide, who it affects, and what can be done to prevent it. So this presentation will cover some statistics to give you an idea of the scope of the problem of suicide, and we will review some key research findings, including the risk factors and protective factors that relate to suicide. And we'll talk about what works and what we can all do to prevent this leading cause of death. How we talk about suicide matters. So before we get started, I want to go over terminology that is used when we talk about suicide. It is important to model this appropriate language so that we do not perpetuate the stigma of suicide or other mental health conditions. So we're going to establish a baseline of shared language on the topic. We avoid using the phrase committed suicide because it can have a very negative connotation. Instead, we encourage the phrase died by suicide. And when talking about suicide and suicide attempts, we avoid referring to suicide attempts as failed or successful. Not only is this unnecessary, these words do imply judgment. So instead, we just encourage the phrase suicide attempt, suicide, or death by suicide. Educating the public about suicide is critical for encouraging help seeking, raising awareness of risk in vulnerable populations, and advocating for new interventions and prevention strategies for those at risk. When suicide is talked about safely and accurately, we can help reduce the likelihood of its occurrence. We want to change how society understands mental health and suicide, because when we open up and connect, talk saves lives. Suicide is a significant issue that affects individuals, families, and communities worldwide. So we're going to look at some statistics that demonstrate the scope of the problem. Suicide is a global problem. According to the World Health Organization, each year, over 800,000 people die by suicide worldwide. While this is the most accurate data available, we estimate the numbers to be higher since suicide is underreported in many countries. That works out to a suicide every 40 seconds worldwide. In the United States, suicide rates are recorded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. According to the CDC, 45,979 people died by suicide in 2020. This is the most recent data available, and it makes suicide the 12th leading cause of death in the United States. Suicide takes more lives in the US than homicide, war, and natural disasters combined. These numbers are one of the many reasons that it's important to talk about suicide like any other cause of death. The more we talk, the less stigmatized the idea that we all face struggles and need support becomes. For every death by suicide, it's estimated that 25 others attempt. That's about 1 million Americans each year who survive a suicide attempt. When you think about any loss, it impacts many people in the community, and suicide is no different. The loss affects family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, schools, faith communities. It is estimated that the majority of Americans will experience a suicide loss over the course of their lifetime. Moving on to research, only in the past several decades have scientists been studying suicide. Research is shedding light on many critical areas, like what drives up risk and what that amounts to effective suicide prevention. And we do still have a lot more to learn. This section will provide an overview of suicide prevention research, key research findings, and future goals in the field. One of the main questions research explores is, why do people take their own lives? Through research, we have learned that there is no single cause for suicide. Suicide most often occurs when several stressors and health issues converge to create an experience of hopelessness and despair. One of the main questions research explores Research has consistently shown that the majority of people who die by suicide have a mental health condition at the time of their death. It may or may not have been recognized by the person or their loved one, and it may not have been diagnosed or adequately treated. With that said, research has also made clear that mental health conditions cannot be the whole story. The vast majority of people who have these health conditions do not die by suicide. In addition to mental health conditions, there are many other factors that increase risk as well. We've learned that the brains of people who die by suicide differ from those who die from other causes in terms of structure and function, specifically in the areas related to stress, response, and impulse control. We've also learned that most people who are suicidal are ambivalent about taking their life. Part of them wants to live, part of them wants to die. This research has informed key strategies in suicide prevention that involve engaging the part of the person that wants to stay alive and helping to create distance from the part of them that wants to die. One way we do that is to help the person connect with reasons for living, while at the same time decreasing the visibility and presence of things around them that may facilitate their desire to die. One of the many important things we have learned from research is about the perspective of a suicidal person, that a crisis point has been reached. For a suicidal person, the pain seems unbearable, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain, or sometimes both. The pain makes ordinary thinking nearly impossible. For a suicidal person, thinking becomes constricted at that moment of crisis, a state of intense tunnel vision where other options seem unavailable. Someone who considers suicide cannot foresee a time when that unbearable pain will end. Understanding the perspective of the suicidal person has also helped us to learn that suicidal feelings are often temporary. They can come on intensely and can sometimes pass in minutes or hours. Keeping people safe and helping them feel supported can get them through those critical moments. There is evidence that putting time and distance between an individual who is suicidal and the means to take their life can be a life-saving action. This is why it is so important that we take steps when we know someone is struggling to help keep them safe. Research has also helped determine the key factors that increase the risk for suicide. Risk factors are defined as characteristics or conditions that increase the chance a person may take their life. Risk factors are important to know to understand the big picture of someone who is considering suicide. Just like someone who is at risk for heart disease because of high blood pressure or a history of heart disease in the family, some people are at higher risk for suicide than others. The main risk factors shown here can be grouped into 3 categories: health factors, historical factors, and environmental factors. These risk factors can converge at different times in life and increase a person's risk for suicidal behavior at particular points in time. The first type of risk factors include health factors, such as biological and psychological medical conditions, the most significant of which are mental health conditions. As we said before, most people who die by suicide have an active mental health problem at the time of their death. Depression is the most common mental health condition and the one that is most associated with suicide. Bipolar disorder is also shown to be high risk, although the disorder is less common than depression. Because these conditions put a person at greater risk for suicide, detecting the presence of a mental health condition is critically important. The best way to be sure when you feel concerned or detect a possible change in you or your loved one's mental health is for the person at risk to seek a professional evaluation and effective treatment. Many people may not realize that their distress has actually become a health problem. Providing information about how to access mental health care or a crisis number if their distress is high can be a solid step in helping them connect to the help they need. And we will talk more about this later when we address prevention. Mental health conditions are not the only health factors that are associated with suicide risk. Serious or chronic health conditions can increase risk, especially when the person also has mental health issues. Chronic pain and serious head injuries have also been found to increase suicide risk. The second type of risk factors include historical factors, such as a family history of suicide, a family history of mental health conditions, or past trauma, such as sexual abuse or combat stress. Research has also found that a history of childhood abuse can contribute to suicide risk. And while most people who attempt suicide do not go on to die by suicide, previous suicide attempts are also considered historical risk factors for suicide and also put a person at increased risk. The third type of risk factors are environmental factors that involve the circumstances of a person's life. Often, there are aspects of a person's environment that can contribute to their overall level of risk. So we're going to look at a few of the most common. Having access to a way of killing oneself is referred to as access to lethal means. This includes having access to a variety of things, such as firearms, drugs, a bridge, a car. Research has shown that contagion, which is the exposure to another person's suicide or to graphic or sensationalized accounts of suicide, especially among those with other risk factors, can increase a person's risk of suicide. Prolonged stress may include harassment, bullying, relationship problems, legal problems, and unemployment. Stressful life events, which can vary across the lifespan, include experiences like divorce, legal problems, or job loss. To better understand suicide risk, here is an example of a set of risk factors that could converge in a person who is suicidal. This example shows what is often the public perception of suicide. When someone dies by suicide, often the story only talks about the environmental factors. People see a life event like a breakup or bullying or a job loss, and then they see the person die by suicide. So they might assume the person killed themselves because of that stressful life event. But that's never the full story. What others don't know is that the person who died may have had genetic risks for suicide. Maybe they were suffering from depression and anxiety disorders, and their work life had become increasingly stressful. Their underlying depression and anxiety could have made the situation at work even worse, or the work stress could have made their depression worse. Perhaps they'd also been drinking more than normal. The key is that the combination of risk factors could have contributed to the suicide death. Therefore, while a life event can play a precipitating role for suicidal behavior, without other underlying risk factors, life events alone aren't thought to cause suicide. Looking to the future, research will help us find the best ways to fight suicide. Research is looking for biomarkers, for example, something testable in a blood sample that would help us to identify those at risk. A number of clinical treatments, like particular types of therapy, are effective for suicidal people and more need to be developed and studied. The good news is that through research, we are learning more and more about what helps those who are in a suicidal crisis. Research can also help us to identify the most effective programs and interventions to reduce suicide rates and to reduce risk in those suffering from mental health conditions. Now moving on to research. Moving on to prevention. Just like there are risk factors that increase a person's risk for suicide, there are also protective factors that lower a person's risk. If you are proactive about mental health and make an effort to get healthier, you protect yourself. Feeling connected to family and community support can protect against suicide. When someone is struggling with depression, anxiety, psychosis, or substance abuse, these protective factors that may normally be strong can erode and temporarily weaken. When that happens, having friends and family to remind us our strengths can be a tremendous protective factor. Problem-solving skills can also help. Life does get really tough, but being able to see a way through problems can be a protective factor. Cultural and religious beliefs that encourage connecting and help-seeking, discourage suicidal behavior, or create a strong sense of purpose can also be a protective factor. Because mental health care is so important for preventing suicide, we're going to focus on this for the next few slides. Getting effective treatment for mental health conditions like depression or anxiety can prevent suicide. Critical to suicide prevention is getting people connected to mental health treatment. One of the biggest challenges in fighting suicide is getting people to address their mental health in the same way they would for physical health. In fact, for those suffering from a mental health condition, less than half seek treatment. One way to encourage individuals to seek help for their mental health conditions is to treat mental health like any other aspect of our health. There are certain times when a person becomes ill and it's critical to seek a trained professional. We need a culture where everyone knows it's smart to take care of our mental health. Taking care of our mental health is just as important as taking care of our physical health. Seeing a mental health professional is a sign of strength, and many are taking that step. The person seeking help should request a thorough evaluation to figure out if there is a mental health condition affecting their life. And there are many types of treatment available, like various kinds of psychotherapy and medications. Research has shown that for many people, the combination of psychotherapy and medications tend to be the most helpful, but the most important thing is to find the treatment that works best for the individual. The good news is that advocacy efforts are improving access to mental health services so that more people can get the treatment they need. The law now requires insurance plans to cover mental health services on par with physical health services. If we need mental health services, and 1 out of 4 of us will at some point, we should get treated and get our health back on track faster. Just like people can find strategies that optimize their physical health, people can do the same for their mental health. In addition to professional mental health care, proactive self-care strategies like good sleep habits, exercise, nutrition, and stress management can also play a critical role in protecting mental health and promoting resilience. Prevention efforts also include support for those touched by suicide. The loss of one person to suicide profoundly impacts many. It's important that survivors have the support they need, both to heal and to reduce their own suicide risk. And since those with lived experience, or those who have attempted suicide or who experience suicidal thinking, are at increased risk, we need to make sure they have the support they need as well. For people who are at a crisis point, the most important thing you can put between a suicidal person and their way of ending their life is time. Research shows that by temporarily reducing a suicidal person's access to lethal means, we give suicidal individuals time for the intense suicidal risk to diminish, and time for someone to intervene with mental health support and resources. For the majority of people who experience a suicidal crisis, if unable to access their chosen method, even temporarily, they are unlikely to engage in another action to end their lives. In most cases, when a suicidal person doesn't have current access to the means that has been on their mind, they don't substitute with another method. Therefore, a clear way to prevent suicide is to limit access to lethal means. During a period of high risk, the safer their environment is, the better chance a suicidal person has of living through that crisis point. Suicide prevention research has looked at a number of ways to create safer environments. Installing an inexpensive carbon monoxide sensor that would automatically shut cars off if carbon monoxide levels reached unsafe levels, that would save lives. We've learned through research that installing barriers on bridges deters suicides, and in many cases, bridge barriers actually lowered the suicide rate for the entire region. Restricting access to potentially lethal medications reduces suicides and can be as simple as requiring lethal drugs to be sold in blister packaging. Firearm safety is critical to reducing suicide rates. In the United States, firearms are used in roughly half of all suicides, making suicide prevention an important part of gun safety education. And as noted already, and contrary to what you may think, when access to lethal means are limited, most people who are suicidal do not find other means. Therefore, the suicide death does not occur in that moment, allowing more time for the person in crisis to get connected to help. Now that we have reviewed key suicide prevention efforts, we're going to talk about what we all can do to help prevent suicide. It's important to have a caring, supportive conversation with someone you might be worried about to allow them to share what they are experiencing. A conversation is a way to show you care and allows you to gain more information about their level of distress. Let's start by talking about suicide warning signs. It's important to watch for the signs in yourself and in others. While many suicide risk factors we discussed earlier endure over a longer period of time, warning signs are observable signs that signal suicidal risk in the near future. It is important to pay attention to both the risk factors we discussed earlier and the warning signs that we're going to talk about right now. If you see warning signs, reach out to the individuals in your life you're concerned about and reach out to others if you're struggling. Seek mental health services if you are depressed or if your anxiety regularly interferes with your daily life, and encourage others to do the same. Suicide warning signs are typically displayed in three main ways: through talk, behavior, and mood. And we're going to look at each of these in more detail. Many people who are suicidal talk about ending their lives. This may be directly or indirectly. A person might say it outright, or they might joke about it, but take it seriously. Some people say they have no reason to live. Others say things that let you know they may feel trapped, or that they are a burden to others, or they may talk about feeling overwhelmed or being in unbearable pain. Behaviors that are atypical for an individual should also encourage you to speak to the person about what you're noticing. People thinking about suicide can display certain behaviors. There may be an increased use of alcohol or drugs. They may have trouble sleeping, either experiencing insomnia or sleeping too much. They may start acting more recklessly. They might withdraw from activities, especially ones they normally enjoy. They might isolate themselves from family and friends. They also might look for a way to kill themselves, such as searching online for methods or shopping for a firearm. They may also give away their possessions or show related behavior like reckless spending. People at risk for suicide can display, often quite subtly, any of the following moods: depression, apathy, rage, irritability, impulsivity, humiliation, anxiety. Moods one would expect of someone who feels overwhelmed and desperate. We all have ups and downs in our mood, but when you notice a change that seems uncharacteristic or concerning, it's important to speak to the person about what you're noticing. For example, sudden unexplained happiness can indicate the individual has decided on a plan and is relieved they will no longer be in pain. That is a lot to look out for, so to sum it up, look for changes in behavior and trust your instincts. Assume you are the only one who is going to reach out. In too many instances, people talked about their concern for someone amongst themselves, but hesitated to reach out to the person directly. So here's the rule of thumb. If you're wondering if someone is depressed or overly anxious, that's a sure sign you should reach out. And the same goes for you. If you are having suicidal thoughts, that's a sure sign that you need to seek help. If you have reached out before, reach out again. The first time the person may not be receptive, but keep trying. Try talking to someone else or with a professional. And even if suicide turns out not to be a concern, they may still be in distress and they may feel comforted and supported just by knowing you care and are taking the time to listen. So, how do you reach out to someone? Talk to them in private, listen to their story, express concern and caring. Ask directly about suicidal thoughts. Don't be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of ending your life? Encourage them to seek mental health services. If in crisis, take them to help. There are some things to avoid when talking with someone who may be suffering from depression or anxiety. Avoid minimizing their feelings. Those of us who have never experienced major depression literally cannot imagine what it feels like. Avoid trying to convince them that life is worth living. If a person is nearing a crisis point, they are not thinking clearly, and philosophical debates about life being worth living tend not to be helpful. Avoid advice to fix it. If the person was having a heart attack, you wouldn't tell them to start exercising or to eat a healthier diet. If they are in crisis, what they need is to be heard and then led to help. Listen to their story and offer to help them find a health professional. Help them take active steps toward keeping their environment safe. If you think they might make an attempt on their life soon, stay with them. Do not leave them alone. But if the situation puts your own safety at risk, leave the area immediately and call 911. Help them remove lethal means or remove themselves from the potentially dangerous area. Escort them to mental health services or an emergency room. Help them to call the lifeline or call the lifeline yourself, and a trained counselor will tell you what you should do to help the person in distress. If they don't feel comfortable speaking to a counselor on the phone, they can also text the word talk to the crisis text line at 741-741. And on here, it has a suicide prevention lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That is still a usable number, but as of July 16th of this year, the suicide prevention lifeline 3-digit number was implemented. So the 3-digit number is 988. It's easier to remember and it's easier to access that way. Both of those, both the crisis line and the suicide prevention lifeline, are open 24/7, 365 days a year. If it's an emergency, such as suicide attempt in progress, call 911. Together, we can create a culture that's smart about mental health. We'll save lives and vastly improve the lives of many more. It is a simple idea, but it's a powerful idea that talk saves lives. By caring and reaching out, we can all play a part in suicide prevention. If you would like to give us some feedback on the presentation, you're more than welcome to go to that website. But I thank you for allowing me to come in and present this important information to you today. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
All right, Jesse, thank you for providing this presentation this evening, just giving the aspects of, suicide and suicide prevention. One of the things that stuck out to me the most was the aspect where you was talking about genetics and doing, the bio testing. I never knew that you could do bio testing to see um, the risk of, suicide within that. So that kind of stood out to me. And, thank you for sharing that information out to all of us that's viewing this evening. And speaking of that, I just want to inform to all of you, if you're watching, this presentation on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter, that you share your comments and your questions on there, because at the end, we're going to do a Q&A session between both of our panelists. So just wanted to put it out there. If you have any questions that you want to be brought up during the Q&A session, to please put it down. So now I'm going to present my second panelist and second presenter. So this individual is a psychotherapist and owner of Mental Health Marty. And the thing is with him is I actually been on his show a few times within the last 2 years. So he's a good brother, and he was well known when it comes to therapy and just making sure everyone is, getting things right and going. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to all of you Martinez Sellers.
Awesome, Johnny. Thank you so much. Listen, don't even go anywhere. You might as well stay on here with me. You know how we do, very much so. And I must say thank you, Johnny, and thank you to the brothers of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. Y'all got some. Yeah, I've been reading all the comments on the side here, and y'all are some proud brothers up in here. So I appreciate you so much, and thank you for this opportunity just to share. What just this very important topic, and I agree with everything that Jessie has said. She's definitely brought all the factors to why this conversation is so important, and I love it. And what I wanted to lend from a different scope and lens when we're definitely dealing with suicide and suicide awareness and prevention, to talk to it from a very specific cultural context as well, specifically being black men. And when we're looking at that, and when we're looking at this from the context of that, because Johnny, as you know, and we all know, we don't talk about suicide and suicide prevention in our community, because what goes on in this house, come on, you know the saying, what happens? It stays
in the house.
It stays in this house. And we have a stigma when it comes to talking about anything mental health and wellness or anything like that, because if I'm being honest, and I love it that we are black male therapists in this field, and we make up really 1% of the field itself. And so we know that we have to get representation is essential, and we have to create. I'm glad that the IOTAs are doing this to create safe spaces for black men to have conversations where we're not judged, where we're not looked down upon, or any of those, because that is so critical for us to begin to open up. So Johnny, men of Iota, thank you for, and continue to do this, because this work is so important. And I'm going to go defer to Dr. Rita Walker out of University of Houston, who is becoming one of the leading experts when it comes to race relationships, and she's in the psychology department, and come to suicide awareness, because I think first and foremost we have to broaden the definition of suicide. And when we're talking about that, and I say it this way, yes, Rashid, I agree with you. We all need to do better. And in this regards, because she says it this way, in the African American community, we have experienced so much trauma till we no longer recognize when we are in crises. Let me say that one more time for those in the back and in the balcony, and the speaker is broke. So just want to make sure you hear me loud and clear. She says we in our African American community, we no longer, because we've experienced so much trauma, we no longer have the capacity or the mental capacity and ability to recognize when we are in crises. And so that says a lot. When we're looking at suicide and suicide ideation, we have to look at our community from a different perspective. What are you saying? I'm so glad you asked me that question, Johnny. So keep talking to me, Johnny, in this. Because I totally agree. I'm going to piggyback on everything that Jessie said and talk to it from an African-American perspective. I am 100% in agreement with Jessie in that suicide is preventable. It is preventable. Again, it is preventable. How do we make it preventable? By having this. Another point she's talked about was having the talk. You're right. Talking is imperative. It is imperative that we have these conversations. Now, this is my own theory about the and I don't have any empirical evidence, but this is just the theory according to Marty Sellers, that I believe we have to get past. We as black men, we are not a monolith. So let me say this one more time. But we have to move past, I believe, the 4 dimensions that society says that we are allowed to be. We are allowed to be the angry black man. That's a problem right there. And we know that anger is a secondary emotion. that there's something else that's driving the anger. We have to be more than being the entertaining black man, and that means entertaining in the sports realm and or entertaining in the music and film realm. We are more than just sexual beings, just going around putting our spawn everywhere in that regard, and we are definitely not the black buffoon. So, in the context of that, what I'm saying, Johnny, is this: when black men are allowed to go past those, it does create this dichotomy that we're not used to and accustomed to talking about. We're not allowed to be sad. We're allowed to be angry, but we're not allowed to be sad. We're not allowed to have problems. We're told to suck it up. We're told to man up. We're told to, you know what? Don't be a punk. You can do better than that. So we have to deal with the toxic view of masculinity that we have, so that that's why it's imperative we create these safe spaces. Can you tell I'm a little excited about this?
Yeah, I can tell. It never fails. It never fails.
Definitely. And so we have to create spaces where it's okay to say, I'm not okay.
Right, right.
We go ahead.
And I was going to say with that, when you had just brought up saying that we don't really want to own up to say that it's okay not to be okay because of that aspect of, especially with us men, that we got to show dominance and we got to show power. And whenever we say that we're not okay, that kind of shows that, oh, we don't have the power, we're weak,
right,
and everything. Right. So with that,
and we I totally agree.
So like with that being, that being said, in that aspect, we have to be able to own up to say that we are not okay with certain things, because that's not really taking the power away from us. That's basically strengthening the power that we already had within us.
Yes. And I love this. We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Exactly.
Yep, exactly.
Vulnerability is not a weakness. It's actually a strength. Right. And we have to be strong enough to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm not okay. And to have these conversations. So when we see that we can say, hey, my brother Johnny, he needs my help. And I'm not going to be, oh man, you cool. No, we got to be able to recognize that. I want to go here too. When we're talking about, when I said earlier, redefining the scope of suicide and suicide ideation. Dr. Rita Walker further says in her book, listen, she does this unapologetically black therapy. It's a fabulous book that she's really done research in our communities. And I have the tendency of agreeing with her in saying this. There are several other things that we have not deemed as being suicidal. Can we talk about those who are on some drug addictions and some of these other things? That's a form of suicide. When we're not going to the doctors, but we know we need to take our high blood pressure, our cholesterol, all these other things, and we refuse to, that's a slow form of suicide. So when we're talking about the context of this, I want to kick out and challenge that we look at it from a broader context, and not just when we're having all these unhealthy sexual relationships and doing that. That's a form of, in my opinion, of suicide, because we're killing ourselves because we have not learned how to love ourselves. When we see these pressures, some other mitigating factors of suicide leads into when I see the society and world and police officers killing people that look like me. Where is that hope? That's a contributing factor for me not feeling well and possibly considering suicide. When I don't have the socioeconomical balances and that other people have that don't look like me, even though I've worked harder, and that's a form that could be a contributing factor for me considering suicide in these factors. One of the comments earlier I read in the chat was talking about how suicide was not common in our communities, especially communities of color. There's part of me that says yes, but the mental side of me and the professional side of me says, I want to disagree with that, respectfully disagree, in that, one, a lot of times suicide is underreported in communities of color. Number two, when we look at that, we've brushed some things under the carpet. And so we have to look at it from a different perspective when it comes to that as well. One of the age gender groups we have to look at with black men is the age group between 25 and 35. That is amongst the highest suicide rate of completed suicides in our community. And we have to create these opportunities for us to share more. That's why I'm excited that all these brothers, I've seen brothers from Chicago, brothers from Atlanta, Florida, Houston, all over the place. So we have to get this message out. And Johnny, again, keep doing this so we have healthy conversations about that. We have to look at, there's so many things we have to look at when it comes to the context of suicide. And we also have to look, I have lost a patient to suicide. And it was a thing that tore me up the most. He was no longer my patient, and about 2 years, and I got a call from his mother, and ironically, when she said her name, I said, "He's no longer with us, is he?" And she said, "No." And I my heart hurt so bad because he was a brilliant young man, would have been 27 today, but took a bus from LA to San Francisco on a bus that's about a 12-hour ride to jump off of the Golden Gate Bridge, all because he was not heard or seen. And sometimes I'm going to go back to what Jesse said, the pain factor. And he's causing me to reshape my thought about suicide in it. And I have to take off, y'all, Johnny, I grew up in the Black Baptist Church. And so, we condemned people to hell
Right.
when there was some suicide, and talked about that because I also believe the Black church has a wrong definition and even understanding of suicide. And that's a whole nother conversation
Yeah,
that
it
we
sure
need to talk
is.
about that. But I was saying all that. I remember one time I ruptured my Achilles, and I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Johnny, I didn't know what was going on. And I see your brother Henry about black girls as well. And so, long story short, by the time I got to the emergency room, I had already taken 10 Tylenol. And they said, "Are you trying to kill yourself?" I said, "No, I'm not trying to kill I just need this pain
Mhm.
to end." And I totally agree with what Jesse was saying. When we're in such a psychological and emotional pain, we don't have the capacity to think rationally. And sometimes at that moment, even if it's for a split second, we think that the temporary solution to this pain is to kill ourselves. But we've made a permanent decision about a temporary problem. That's not judging or anything, but that's just to say there's a cry for help, and we have to watch behaviors. So I want to kind of address what Henry was saying with black girls. We know statistically Black boys and black young men are 4 times more likely to have completed suicides than what our black girls. Do
Right.
our black girls have situations and problems?
Yeah, they
Yes,
do.
they do, and I'm not
Hmm.
putting one any light. But however, men are more direct and have more completed suicides than what we do know that women have, because men are more violent. Gunshot wounds, jumping off of bridges, where women statistically, and I'm painting with a very broad paintbrush here, typically do other things such as taking pills or something like that. So both are a cry for help, but nonetheless, we have to pay attention to when people are crying out for help and we don't know how to respond. But just like Jesse said, we don't have to have all the answers, but we need to engage in the conversation with that as well. So I'm going to stop there real quick because I can go on and on and on about that. And maybe we bring in Jesse and we can definitely start taking on some questions, because I'm not for sure, how much more time, Johnny, we
Yeah.
have, and I don't want to just be, I can go on here for
I
days.
know you
And,
can.
and can I
But
do a shameful plug?
go ahead.
A
Yep.
shame,
Go
yes,
ahead. Go
yes.
ahead.
So I'm going to do a shameless plug on tomorrow night. I do have a YouTube channel called Mental Health Marty. I would love for the brothers to subscribe to that. I do a show every Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time because I'm on the West Coast. Tomorrow night we are going to be continuing this conversation about suicide and suicide ideation and what that looks like specifically within our Black and Brown and our BIPOC communities, because I think, yes, we talk about it, but I want to be more specific about what does it look like in our communities and how do we have these healthy conversations about that. So shameless plug, tomorrow night, next Wednesday, Tuesday, I've got my all days all mixed up because of the holiday. At
Yeah.
7 p.m., we're going to be continuing this conversation. I love it. There's some great questions on here. I love this question.
Great.
Can we put that one up about also check about being strong?
Yep. So Brother Rashad Riley said we have to also check on those that we consider strong because all of us need support.
I totally agree. Here's what I'm going to say because Jesse talked about this earlier. It's not about, it really is about how we present. We have to stop being judgmental, talk about what's wrong with you. That's
Hmm.
going to shut me down.
Right.
We have to answer, say, you know what, Johnny, you don't look like yourself. It looks like something's bothering you. Can we talk? Or brother,
Hmm.
how can I support you? That's not judgmental at that point. And in our culture, we can be very judgmental at
Yep.
times, especially when we got, amongst ourselves. What's
Right.
wrong with you?
Yeah.
And that's the language we have to challenge and disassociate from so that we
Mhm.
create safe spaces to have these safe conversations
Yep.
about that.
Definitely, definitely. So now I want to open the Q&A session portion of this presentation. So I'm looking through the comments now to pull up some questions. So let's see, let's see. So Brother Shaggy
That's good.
Force brought up, what can organizations like Iota do to help combat the stigma of mental illness in the Black community? Mental health is not a topic that is heavily discussed in our community, in which I agree, mental health is not a topic that's heavily discussed in our community. That's what kind of led into us bringing
Yes.
this presentation this evening and having time be an initiative that actually talks about mental health, talks
Hmm.
about financial wellness, and talk about legal wellness and how those different things kind of affect us as individuals, but also how those things tie into each other as well. Um, late, I can say like later within the lines, hopefully in the near future, we'll have um, some events where we will allow chapters to actually host events under the Time Initiative. Time is still a brand new initiative that just got formed last year, and
Wonderful.
lately we have been doing like a lot of live stream events and talks about different things from mental health, from financial wellness. Right now, we are working on a legal wellness piece that we're trying to bring up soon, and things like that. And the more conversation and more talks that we have lately, the brothers and within the community have been receiving, that knowledge, that wisdom, that love, and information that they want to get to spread to others within their communities. And what we want to do later along those lines is have the chapters be able to host their own events as well. Um,
Yeah, Johnny, I totally agree with you. And I think some of the things we do is just having these forums, but going out into the community. And,
mhm.
and, and I encourage anyone who's in the mental health, whether you're a mental health professional or not, even a wonderful advocate, and bringing Jesse out and other people to say, hey, it's okay that we talk about mental health. And it's not a badge of shame, it's actually a badge of honor. And let's talk about it. One of the things I do with men, especially Black men,
Mhm.
they get real scared about mental health. They do. I was like, so one of the things I do, I said, well, let me just be your mental health coach. And even language, like Jesse was talking about, it makes a huge difference because when most of us, some of us have played on some sports team, and we know that when I ask us that, what's the purpose of a coach? To make us better. What is the purpose of a coach? To show us our strengths and show us our weaknesses. I said, that's all I'm here to do. Point out behaviors and help you make some changes based upon the goals that you set. And so even language like that can make a huge difference in that. Jesse, I don't know if that you've experienced that with any men when you talk about that. And because, we as men, we don't like the thought of sometimes mental health therapists. And that's just what I'm seeing sometimes.
Well, we definitely experience that, but we've been talking with people, they almost change what their idea of what masculinity is, and to acknowledge that there is masculine strength in talking about what we need to talk about, and finding that comfort there. So it's changing our own views about what masculinity actually means.
Yes, totally agree.
And here's another question that's stuck out, and this question is mainly for you, Marty, but Jesse, you could ask this as well too. So the question is, and this is from Brother Danielle Hill, can you unpack what society means when we say it's okay not to be okay? What is okay look like?
I think what happens is, and I go back to sometimes that toxic masculinity, especially within our culture, that we are not allowed to be sad, or we are not allowed to be angry. Because I'm going to say it this way, because we notice it even early in our elementary boys when they are angry, when they have outbursts of anger, all of that. That's clearly in some, when we're looking at the DSM, those are clearly symptoms of that can be either depression, anxiety, and too often we're quickly to label a oppositional diagnosis or a conduct. And same thing with a lot of times black men. And so when I see an angry black man, I will ask him, instead of, what's wrong with you, be like, hey, what kind of what's bothering you? You seem off kilter. You don't seem like you're normally a happy person. And like I said, as we know, that anger is a secondary emotion, that there's so many, if we're looking at the iceberg, anger is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's so many other things that's fueling that. And oftentimes we need to get to what's fueling our anger, what's fueling us not being okay, what's fueling the suicide ideation. And when we get to have those conversations, again, bro, Johnny, let's go grab some coffee. Let's go grab, especially we're seeing people using alcohol, which we know is a depressant, or increased drug use and all these other things. There's something they're screaming out, I'm not okay. And so, Danielle, I hope that answers that question. And sometimes that's what it looks like. What would you say also to that, Jesse?
Well, when you say it's okay to not be okay, it speaks to that stigma. You mentioned it speaks to that stigma that we're trying to battle, because it's okay to have mental health. It's okay to feel these ways, but we need to know that it's okay to feel those ways. And so that way we actually, like you said, Marty, have those conversations with each other.
Yes.
It's a healthy conversation. We actually have a program where for 5 to 11-year-olds and their trusted adults, where, we teach these young kids to, if they feel sad, mad, or worried, what can we do? Where can we go? Who do you want to talk to? Who's your trusted adult? So it starts the conversation really early, letting them know that these are normal, healthy conversations to have, so they grow up with that knowledge. Yes. And they're okay talking about it as they get earlier. So it is okay to not be okay, but it's also okay to ask for that help. So it's decreasing that stigma and knowing that that we have to take care of our mental health, our physical, just like we would our physical health. And the health is health. Yes. It doesn't matter whether it's here or anywhere else. And that's where the changes need to happen.
It does. And there's a wonderful free app that's called Not Okay.
Yes, I love that app.
Don't you love it? I met those creators, and it was created by a brother and sister dynamic duo. Oh my, it's phenomenal. And I got a chance to meet them about right before the pandemic, Johnny and Jesse, in Atlanta at the American Counseling Association conference. And it's amazing, and it's definitely designed for children, but
Mhm,
I know some
mhm,
adults who could use it too. And so y'all, as we have our mentees and everything, it's a great app to have because it will contact three trusted adults. It can call
mhm,
911. It shares the
mhm,
location where they're at. It's just beautiful, and it's a wonderful way sometimes when you don't have the ability to say you're not okay, especially in
mhm,
parties, and we're trying to prevent date rape or kidnapping, all
Mhm.
these other things. It's perfect for that. Not okay, designed by a brother and sister African American young teen. They're probably not even teenagers anymore, but it's an amazing app. So I share that app all the time because I
mhm.
think it's amazing, made by kids, for kids, and it's a
Or kids,
great,
right?
great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just did a presentation earlier and I talked about it because you can upload the contact information
Yes.
of your circle and they call it a
Yep.
trusted circle. And if you're not okay, you just hit a button and it sends a
Button.
message out and to those people and they know that you need that help right then and there. So
Yes.
absolutely.
And can I even suggest even that especially I think for if we're talking about young boys, us learning to have better conversations, father son, uncle nephew, mentee mentor, and we start teaching them how to share where they're at emotionally. We
Mhm.
can make it, and I want to charge this amazing fraternity that you guys learn to that you do that and share that, because just imagine if we did that across the country, just starting with the Iotas, what a difference in so many young men's lives that you all can change and change the trajectory of talking about mental health services, especially in our lower economic, socioeconomic communities where we know there's a challenge with healthcare. There's a risk with talking about these things. We know that sometimes our children don't get the necessary medical help. And we still, as a community, sometimes are very afraid of doctors. We still are not that far removed from the Tuskegee experiments that still somehow put. And so having that trust and building better bonds and relationships with our medical doctors, and finding therapists who look like us. And maybe you all have a group of therapists that you all recommend. You have 10 that you say, hey, these are our recommended therapists and our
Mhm.
recommended providers. Now we are having the right conversations, and making those partnerships, because in many communities of color, we like referrals. We don't like doing the cold turkey stuff, because it's hard enough, getting those whole listings, trying to find whether it's through Kaiser or Blue Cross Blue Shield. You're like, I don't know these people, but we know that when there's a trusted provider that says, "Hey, Jessie is my therapist, and I trust her," that breaks down the barriers right there, and we can make a huge difference in how our community interacts and even receives mental health services.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, before we close out, Jesse, would like to have you share your contact information.
Oh, there it is.
There it is.
Oh, but there it is. Everyone. So everyone, you can definitely reach out to Jesse at this email address. Especially if you want a copy of the PowerPoint that she actually presented this
Hmm.
evening, you could get it from her, or also you can email me at IPTACR CONM serve at iota5theta.org. Um, and most of y'all actually can reach out to me on social media and things like that to reach out to me and be able to get the information that was presented this evening. But before we go, I do want to share out the two phone numbers that was brought up earlier this evening. One is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Helpline, which is also known as SAMHSA, which is
Hmm.
1-800-622-4357. And then also the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, as we all know that the number did change in July, in which you just dial a three simple number, what is
988.
988. And for both of those hotlines is 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So be able to reach out to them and get your resources. Again, I definitely want to appreciate Jesse and Martinez for being on this evening just to talk about this topic and being able to just share this information out to everyone, especially on this month that is Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. Everyone be able to look out if you missed out this live and missed out the viewing of this video. You can definitely check it out on Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated's YouTube channel. Also, you can check it out on Twitter and on the fraternity's Facebook page. It will still be on there for your viewing pleasure, and you can still share it out to anyone and everyone. Again, I appreciate all of you, and I want to pass this over to our Director of Health Initiatives, Brother Victor Peoples.
So good evening, everyone, and to everyone that's in the chats or on the social platforms. We definitely would like to thank you guys for attending this very important topic. Before I do in this session, I just would like to ask one question to Johnny, Marty, and Martinez gave me permission to call him Marty.
Yes, sir.
When I was listening through the conversation in 2019, I was that angry black man. In 2020, 2019, 2021, I was that entertaining black man. In 2021, I had SALT counseling. And this was for a variety of just things that just seemed like they were piling on. And so when you guys asked the question or made the statement about the talk, how do you, without being disrespectful, nosy, or anything of the sort, how do you start that conversation? Jesse
Go ahead,
first.
Jesse.
Well, I mean, Marty kind of already said it, just saying, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been yourself lately. Do you want to talk about what's going on? If it's someone you work with, I've been noticing you've been late for work or haven't been coming in that much. Is everything okay? You want to avoid, the you statements, you want to go with I've noticed this. You don't want to use accusing statements. I've noticed this, and I'm concerned. I'm here if you want to talk, whenever you're ready. Just let me know. So, you're opening that door. You're allowing them to know that you're someone who is ready to talk to them whenever they're ready. And you're allowing that conversation to kind of happen. So it's a hard conversation to start. It's an awkward conversation to start, but it's such a simple question to ask. And then based on that based on like how the conversation goes, your job is just to sit back and listen. Your job isn't to fix. It's to listen and to understand, and without judgment or anything like that. And based on what they say, they can say something like, I just feel very trapped. I feel very alone. And then based on that, you can say, hearing you say these things, it kind of sounds, that you might be thinking along these lines. And, is that the case? Are you thinking about that? And if they say no, then say, all right, well, I'm glad that you were willing to talk with me about it. And if they say yes, be like, all right, well, let's look at some resources and see how we can get you some help. So again, our job isn't to, try to control the conversation. Our job isn't to try and, fix things. It's to listen and see how we can move through the conversation and get them to what they need based on what they're telling us. So that's how I would start it.
Now with me, the way I started off is just asking them, how are you doing? Just like Jesse said, you don't want to go dig into them real easy right then and there, because you want to have them be able to be comfortable with you, and also being able to have that trust with you to actually open up on how they really feeling. So basically starting off by saying, how are you doing? If they don't say anything, you just be like, you don't beat yourself up on it. You just say, okay, I know that you don't want to talk right now, but later when you're ready to talk, I'm here for you. And then once they hear that, most likely they'll come back to you later on and say, okay, I got somebody that I could talk to about my feelings and stuff like that. I could go from there. But then if you ask them how they're doing and they automatically just let it out and let it loose, then you just be right there, just listen to them, because there might be some moments where they try to open up and share so many times to other people, but then they got shut down by so many times and so many people. So with you just being, being quiet and just being an open and listening ear to them, that just let them know to say, okay, I got somebody that actually want to hear me out and wants to actually, you know, pay attention to what I'm feeling and what I'm going through, which will build into that relationship. I'll give you an example with this. This evening, with one of my clients that I had saw this evening, I had just checked in with him and just asked him how his day was at school. And at first, he didn't want to say anything. He just like, school was good. That's all he said. But I told him, I said, whenever you're ready to talk about school, just let me know. And after a few
Hmm.
minutes later, that's when he just talked about how the week has been for him and what he's been going through. And then that's when I was able to like give him, that comfort and support that he needed from there.
Yeah. I want to add that I love the power of presence.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's not even saying anything, it's just being there and knowing that my brother cares for me, knowing that my sister cares for me. You all have this amazing fraternity. And sometimes just the power of presence and going back to the basic principles of brotherhood, if I can speak from a male context, is all that you sometimes just need. That my brother cares enough about me. We ain't got to say anything. He just here. We just drinking coffee. We just, whatever. And then lending that, that like both Jesse and Johnny have said, that ear of listening and being ready. And it's not our job to fix. Men, we like to fix. It's not our job to fix. And tell yourself, it's not my job to fix. I'm here to support. That's it. I'm here to support and redirect. There's a wonderful, and I'm going to address some of in the chat. Someone says it's hard to find professionals or that look like there's a website, therapyforblackmen.com. It's an amazing website where you can find specific therapists who are of color, therapy for black men. And I think they have one for therapy for black girls as well.
Hmm.
In that. But Psychology Today, Good Therapy, all of those. Now people have profiles on there, and you can even see which insurances they take. And if in doubt, ask them if they take a sliding scale. I do sliding scales all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all over the place now. Another
Yes.
thing I want to add, I had the question asked of me once, if what if somebody's always saying, oh, I just want to die, I just want to kill myself, and they sound like they're joking. And I said, well, ask the question. Are you actually
Right.
feeling that way? Because that can be a teaching moment almost, maybe if you can
Hmm.
teach them, if they're not feeling that way, that's something that they probably shouldn't say. And, if you keep saying it, I'm going to keep asking you. And it also, if
Right.
someone's around and hears you ask that question, maybe they are thinking about it. And now all of a sudden, your response to that person asking them has now made you someone who they know they can come and talk to. So you've opened
Hmm.
up a door and said, I'm someone safe who you can come and,
Yeah.
and share your story with. So it really lets people know as you go through and meet people and have these conversations that you are someone who will be a supporter. And
Yeah.
that's so important. That's so important. And it's important to take care of ourselves. These are heavy
That's
things to talk
right.
about and it's exhausting. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves along the way too.
Love
So
it.
I definitely appreciate you guys. In 2019, early 2020, no, I'm sorry, late 2020, early 21, I had got with Johnny behind the fact that I didn't think where he was positioned in the fraternity, his skill set wasn't being utilized.
Mm.
And I came up with time. And it's like, how can we tie these three together and you lead this charge, Johnny? We talked about it often until we finally came up with a blueprint in a sense. So for Shaggy and Rashad Sheedy, I will say that the things that you were asking about as far as in the chat, we're trying to provide that platform for the Brothers of Iota, but more importantly, the community as well. Additionally, I have to mention as well, as far as you mentioned the youth. So as we are revamping our youth mentoring program, one of the components of our curriculum will be a mental health component. So there will be a piece in there that deals with, hey, where am I at today? And so I would like to thank our 23rd International Grand Player, Sean D. Housen Sr., for allowing us to have this platform with time. I'd like to thank everyone in the audience that attended. Johnny, the mental health subcommittee that you chair currently, in air quotes. And I do thank you for all that you do, Johnny, as far as your leadership for time. For Jesse and Martinez, I believe, and I can only use my I statements as indicated earlier, that you guys did a phenomenal job as far as bringing information that some of us may have known, but just needed reassurance, and it just needed to be reiterated. So for you guys, I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to spend your time with the Brothers of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. And then last but not least, I would like to thank Brother Gibbs Hightowers, our marketing guru who's behind the scenes, doing all this stuff behind the scenes. So, Johnny, back to you, sir.
All right. So before we go, I just want to see if Jesse and Martinez have any closing remarks.
Wow. Jesse.
Um,
Ladies first.
Thank you. Sure. Just, thank you for allowing us to be here and talk about this such important topic. It is, as Johnny mentioned, it is National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. But it's not just something that we do in September. It's something that we pay attention to always. And even though, COVID happened, if one thing came out of COVID, it was that now more people are talking about their mental health, and they are getting help for it. And we know that the number, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline number, has gotten so many calls, especially with the implementation of the 988 number. And I don't want to, and that's, to me, that's not scary because it's being used. And so, I mean, there are people out there who need this, who always needed this resource, who always need these resources, but now they're using them. And I think that that's so important. And I think that with the pandemic and everything that happened, that us acknowledging our mental health has become so much more important to our communities, and it is happening more. So that's something that we can take away. And actually, the national suicide rate did go down in 2020. And that's something that we need to acknowledge as well. It was the 10th leading cause of death in 2019, and it's the 12th leading cause of death in 2020. So that says a lot. People are reaching out for help and having those conversations. So thank you for wanting to be a part of that and learning more about it.
No, excellent. No, thank you so much again, Johnny, to this amazing fraternity for having this conversation and really being leaders in how we change how we talk about mental health, especially in the African American community and among men. We do know that men are leading this whole thing of completed suicides. And so in closing, I always say it this way, that too many of us are secretly suffering in the shadow of shame. But I always say we have to speak up and speak out in order that we might be able to live. So that's how we have those conversations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And lastly, if anyone is interested in becoming a member or participating with the Time Initiative, you can contact me at Community Service Director at iotaphitheta.org. Or Johnny, what is your email?
All right. So my email is ipt.acrcomm@iotaphitheta.org.
Appreciate you all. Have a good day. And we appreciate you guys for your service this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.